The rent nightmare in Manhattan has officially crossed into insanity. The headline number says it all. Average rents are now hovering around $5,000 a month, and even the tiniest studio apartments are approaching nearly $4,000 a month. Imagine moving to New York City just to pay luxury car money every single month for a glorified box in the sky. And somehow, despite those prices, there are barely 4,000 active apartment listings across all of Manhattan. A city of millions is now operating like an overcrowded concert venue where everybody is fighting over the last seat in the building. The affordability crisis is no longer a warning sign. It is happening right now in real time. People are entering the housing lottery hoping for some kind of miracle, but for many residents, nothing ever comes from it. They apply, wait, refresh their emails, and hear absolutely nothing back. Meanwhile, politicians continue standing in front of cameras promising affordability, while regular people are struggling just to survive another month. Tenants openly admit they barely have enough money left over to eat after paying rent. Daily life in New York has become a financial endurance test, where every grocery run, every subway ride, and every utility bill feels like another punch to the wallet.
What makes this even crazier is that the market never cooled off during winter. Normally, New York rental prices dip during colder months because demand slows down and landlords compete harder for tenants. That never happened. Prices kept climbing through late 2025 and into winter, like the laws of economics simply stopped existing. Real estate agents are saying they still see bidding wars, still see lines outside apartment listings, and still see desperate renters offering more money than the asking price just to secure somewhere to sleep at night. And that reveals the real problem underneath everything. New York simply does not have enough apartments. The city is trapped in a severe housing shortage while simultaneously making it harder and harder to build new housing. Instead of solving the supply problem, politicians continue focusing on rent freezes, regulations, and symbolic policies that sound compassionate but end up squeezing the market even tighter. When supply keeps shrinking while demand stays high, prices don't magically go down. They explode upward.
Now, people who already have apartments are terrified to let them go. Tenants are clinging to their leases like survival lifeboats, because once they leave, they know they may never find another affordable place again. This creates an even bigger bottleneck. Apartments rarely hit the market because nobody wants to risk losing what they already have. The result is a frozen city, where movement stops, inventory disappears, and newcomers are forced into bidding wars over the few remaining units available. The numbers are absolutely staggering. Manhattan one-bedroom apartments are averaging well above $5,000 a month, while two-bedrooms are climbing past $8,000. Even splitting rent with roommates barely makes living there manageable anymore. People are now paying luxury prices just to share walls with complete strangers they met online. The dream of independent city living has transformed into financial survival mode, where privacy itself has become a luxury item.
And it doesn't stop with rent. Step outside your apartment and the costs keep piling on. Groceries are outrageously expensive. Everyday items feel inflated beyond recognition. Residents complain about basic necessities like milk and ice cream costing absurd amounts because businesses themselves are drowning under taxes, regulations, theft, and operational costs. Store owners raise prices just to stay alive, while consumers absorb the punishment every time they shop. At the same time, landlords are also getting squeezed from every direction. Property taxes rise, maintenance costs rise, insurance costs rise, labor costs rise. Yet many owners are legally restricted in how much they can increase rents, so the math eventually stops working. Buildings begin falling into financial distress because the expenses outpace the income being generated from the apartments inside them.
Some reports now estimate that as many as 100,000 apartments across New York are already under financial distress conditions. Others argue the true number could be 2 or 3 times higher. Entire buildings are struggling because regulated rents are no longer covering operating costs. And when owners cannot properly maintain properties, buildings slowly deteriorate. Deferred repairs become common. Infrastructure ages. Living conditions worsen. The housing stock itself begins collapsing under financial pressure. At the center of all this is New York's divided housing system. One side of the market is heavily regulated. The other side operates closer to free market conditions. The regulated apartments become impossible to leave because tenants fear never finding another affordable option. Meanwhile, the unregulated apartments become insanely expensive because they are the only places where landlords can still attempt to recover rising costs. The result is two completely different realities existing side by side in the same city.
The tragedy is that everyone already knows the obvious solution. Build more housing, build taller buildings, increase density, expand supply. Yet year after year, zoning laws, regulations, neighborhood opposition, and political resistance continue blocking large-scale development. Entire sections of New York remain artificially low-rise, despite sitting in the middle of one of the most overcrowded cities on Earth. The city desperately needs more homes, but policies continue making construction painfully difficult and financially risky. Developers now look at New York and hesitate before investing billions into new projects. Construction costs are already astronomical. Regulations are endless. Approval processes take forever. And after finally finishing a building, owners face more restrictions on pricing and future rent increases. Many simply decide the risk is not worth it anymore. Why pour money into a hostile market where profitability becomes increasingly uncertain?
That fear is amplified by newer regulations like good cause eviction laws. Supporters argue these laws protect renters from outrageous rent hikes and unfair evictions. Critics argue they unintentionally discourage investment and reduce market flexibility. Tenants gain more security, but landlords lose pricing freedom, which means owners become even more dependent on turnover whenever an apartment becomes vacant. That is why bidding wars become so intense the moment a unit finally hits the market. The irony is brutal. Policies designed to increase affordability are contributing to scarcity, and scarcity pushes prices even higher. Once someone secures an apartment, they stay forever because moving becomes financially suicidal. That means turnover dries up, listings vanish, competition intensifies. Every empty apartment suddenly becomes a battlefield because renters know opportunities are disappearing faster than ever.
And then there's the hidden trick landlords use to navigate the system: concession pricing. Apartments are advertised with 1 month free or 2 months free incentives that temporarily lower effective rent, but the actual lease still reflects the higher base price. So when renewal time arrives, increases are calculated from the inflated lease amount rather than the discounted promotional rate tenants originally paid. It creates the illusion of affordability while quietly setting renters up for painful future increases. Families are also being squeezed out of the city entirely. Developers mostly build studios and one-bedroom apartments because those units generate the highest returns per square foot. But families need larger homes. 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom apartments are increasingly rare and impossibly expensive. Parents quickly realize New York is no longer designed for raising children, unless you are extremely wealthy. That creates another long-term problem. Middle-class families leave the city altogether, while luxury renters and high earners dominate the remaining market. Entire neighborhoods gradually lose economic diversity as ordinary working people get pushed farther away from Manhattan and deeper into outer boroughs or completely out of state. The city risks transforming into a playground for the ultra-rich and a pressure cooker for everyone else. Meanwhile, politicians continue promising more programs, more subsidies, and more spending initiatives. Free daycare, free services, rent freezes, expanded assistance. But many residents argue none of these policies address the root issue. If there simply are not enough apartments for the population, no amount of financial assistance changes the underlying shortage. You cannot subsidize your way out of missing inventory.
And every new expense added onto property owners eventually circles back into the housing market one way or another. Taxes increase, operational costs increase, compliance costs increase. Those costs do not disappear. They either get passed on to renters, absorbed through deteriorating building conditions, or discourage future investment entirely. Eventually, the system starts breaking under its own weight. The psychology of the city is changing too. People no longer move to New York expecting opportunity alone. They move expecting financial warfare. The housing search itself feels traumatic. Renters stand in long lines for apartment tours. They carry folders full of financial documents, like they are applying for citizenship rather than renting a home. Excellent salaries no longer guarantee housing security. For younger residents, the dream of building a future in Manhattan feels increasingly impossible. Even professionals with stable careers struggle to justify spending half or more of their income on rent alone. Saving money becomes difficult. Starting families becomes unrealistic. Long-term stability becomes uncertain. The city's legendary energy still attracts people, but surviving there now requires financial sacrifices many simply cannot sustain. And yet, demand remains relentless because New York still offers something few cities can replicate. The culture, career opportunities, nightlife, entertainment, and global influence continue pulling people in despite the crushing costs. That constant demand keeps the pressure alive, even as affordability collapses. People are willing to endure extraordinary financial pain just to remain part of the city's ecosystem. The frightening part is that many analysts believe this is only the beginning. Inventory continues shrinking. Construction remains insufficient. Regulations continue expanding. Population pressure remains enormous. If those trends continue together, today's crisis could eventually look mild compared to what comes next. A city already struggling with affordability may soon face even more extreme shortages and even more aggressive pricing. At some point, the market reaches a dangerous tipping point where essential workers can no longer afford to stay. Teachers, nurses, service workers, emergency responders, artists, and young professionals all begin leaving because the math simply no longer works. Once enough working residents disappear, the city starts damaging the very infrastructure that keeps daily life functioning.
The most frustrating part for many observers is how predictable all of this feels in hindsight. The warning signs were visible years ago. Inventory shortages were already emerging. Construction bottlenecks already existed. Housing demand was already overwhelming supply. But instead of aggressively expanding development, political conversations became dominated by short-term fixes and ideological battles, while the structural crisis kept deepening underneath everything. Now, New York finds itself trapped in a vicious cycle. High demand causes high prices. High prices encourage regulations. Regulations discourage development. Reduced development worsens shortages. Shortages increase competition. Competition pushes prices even higher. And every year, the cycle tightens further around the people trying to live there.
The terrifying reality is that no quick fix exists anymore. Even if the city approved massive construction tomorrow, it would still take years before enough new housing entered the market to meaningfully reduce pressure. And until that happens, renters remain stuck, competing over an increasingly tiny number of available apartments, while costs continue climbing into the stratosphere. New York City has always been expensive, competitive, and intense. But what's happening now feels fundamentally different. This is no longer just a difficult housing market. It is a city entering a full-scale affordability crisis, where ordinary people are being forced to fight for the basic right to exist within its borders.